This is part 2 in the Craftsman King Seeley 3-wheel bandsaw rebuild. If you haven't seen part 1, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be disassembling the bandsaw. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. To give you some idea, this is the parts diagram from the owner's manual. And as you can see, it's not an overly complicated design. So here we are with the bandsaw. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the motor from the pedestal base. I'm just sticking a block of wood under it, so if it falls, get rid of that homemade dust cover. And there's two different designs for the motor mounts that mount to the pedestals. This is the older design. The newer design is what I have on my other bandsaw, which uses a really big U-bolt. So now we're just removing the 3 external knobs that hold this side of the cover on. And these are in pretty good shape. So now we can remove this side of the cover. And as you can see, it's a really simple internal design that's built all on a frame. So now I'm attempting to remove the blade tensioning knob. And this is a contraption that has a spring and a sleeve and a nut and the knob. But it's not really complicated. And when we go to reassemble, I'll get into more detail of it. So here we're just removing the blade guard. It's engine turned aluminum and it's just held on by 2 screws. And now we're going to start disassembling the upper guide bracket. So most of these set screws are slotted set screws, and these 2 on the front end of it are what hold the blade guide rods, and those 2 rods are brass and they're 1/4 inch in diameter and about 3/4 of an inch in length. I'll be replacing them with cool blocks, but I'll go into more of that when we get to the reassembly. Just know that you need to know the specific part number if you're going to order the cool blocks, and I'll give that when we get to it. And we can get the blade off now. There's a screw at the end of the table gap that retains the blade inside the table. But it's so grimy under there, I can't even find the screw right now. So we just skipped it. And here we've got a snap ring that's holding on the idler wheel. And that black small circle that's at that number 2 position directly above the shaft bore, that's an oil port for oiling the needle bearings that are on the inside of each one of the idler wheels. And we will be replacing those needle bearings. There's 2 of them in there. Kind of hard to see, but they're in there. Next, we have a square head set screw that holds the idler shaft to the frame. So we can remove the set screw and then the shaft, like so. So you can raise and lower the bracket that has the blade guard built into it. And that knob is on the back side that I just removed. And then this is the piece that retains the bracket. And we're just sort of messing with the bracket here, but we'll go ahead and remove the blade thrust bearing or guide. It's a solid piece, and then there's another set screw that we have to remove that gets the part that the end of that thrust guide was sitting in. And inside that hollow part, there is a bearing. And I'm going to drop it here in a second once it comes out, but there it goes. One single ball bearing. The other half of the outer cover is held in place by 3 cap nuts that I'm removing now. So we'll just remove those 3 cap nuts. And next we've got the second idler wheel. So we've got a snap ring on it that we can just remove. Pull the wheel off of its shaft. And this one is identical to the first idler wheel. So we've got another snap ring on the inside of that shaft. Now this shaft pivots because this is how you adjust the blade tension as well as the tracking of the blade. So these screws were really in here tight, but we got them off, no problem. And then we can pull out the tensioning mechanism and disassemble it. And there is a pin that holds this shaft inside this bracket. And I'm just using a brush to see which end of that pin is splined, so we know which way to drive it out. Here I'm just using a 1/4 inch punch to drive that pin out. I'm just making sure I can see the splines. So we're good. We'll just knock it out the rest of the way. There we go. And that paddle that goes through the center of the shaft, I'll figure out how to get out of there at a later date. So here I'm going to go ahead and remove the pulley. And once we have it off, we can then pull off the cover. And here I'm unbolting the trunnions from the table. So this table can tilt up to a 45-degree angle. There's probably a better way of getting the table off of here, but this is how I do it. And I had one bolt out of all of them that was being stubborn, but got it. And there we have the table. So at this point, I can now see that screw that's capturing the blade. So we're going to hit that with some PB Blaster and let that sit for a few minutes. Next, we'll go ahead and just remove the upper guide bracket. Then we've got the two trunnions. And I'm disassembling the lower guide bracket, which is almost exactly like the upper. So there are 2 thrust bearings on this bandsaw, as well as 4 guide rods. Those brass rods that I'm going to replace with cool blocks. And then we're just going to give a couple of taps to the shaft that the drive wheel is on. It has a water pump bearing in there, so some taps and there it goes. And we'll talk more about that bearing later on. So there's one of the trunnions. And now we're just disassembling the mount for the frame. And I dropped a part. But we get all those off. And that technically is the bandsaw. So the rest of this is the pedestal mount. So if you buy just the pedestal mount, this is what you have. So this base, or the mount, I guess, is the top part there. It has one set screw. And then you've got the set screw in the base that captures the column. And there you go. So here we are with that screw that captures the blade in the table. PB Blaster did the job. It comes right out, even though I dropped the screwdriver. Then we can get the blade out. Here I'm just knocking out the center. So on every one of the wheels, they have a tire. And it's rubber and it's old and will need to be replaced. And you can get replacement tires for these wheels on eBay. So I've already ordered a set. Next, there's a washer on each side, and then we're going to knock out those needle bearings. So if you're trying to preserve the needle bearings, this is not the way to do it. But I'm going to be replacing them, so I really don't care. I just want to get them out of there. So that's one. And then I'll remove the other one pretty much the same way and do that for both of the idler wheels. Here we are with the covers again, and both the model number plate and the Craftsman logo plate are riveted to these covers. So I had to drill away the inside part of those rivets, and then I can get these covers or these panels off like so. This one was kind of stubborn. So I just used a punch to knock that rivet back through. There it goes. And get the rivet out of there, and there's your panel. Same process for the Craftsman logo. And here we're just removing the mount from the motor. And so this motor, when I bought this, I was told the motor didn't run. And this is the very first induction motor I've ever worked on. Really cool design. So you've got two wires that go into two brushes, and those two brushes ride on a big brass ring that's directly connected to the rotor. Like hardly any moving parts in this thing. So I'm disassembling the brushes, and I'm going to put another power cord on here because this one's frayed, and I suspect that's what's wrong with the motor, because everything else looks fine. So we got the new power cord, hook it up, and boom, motor purrs like a kitten. So we're golden. This motor works perfectly fine, and it's nice and quiet. And normally green is my color, but not on a motor. So this thing obviously is going to get a repaint just like everything else. So we got the 4 long screws that hold the motor together, just like every other motor out there that we've worked with. And I started trying to get this pulley off of the shaft. And let me tell you, this is the toughest pulley I've ever had to deal with. It did not want to come off. I've tried PB Blaster, all kinds of stuff. So one of the problems with the pulley is, or the rotor shaft is a little mushroomed on the end. So even if I am able to get that pulley moving, it's going to get hung up on that mushroomed end. So I'm using a file here. Once I got that file down, you can see I've already bent this pulley quite a bit. And I've pretty much decided I'm not going to save the pulley. I just want to get it off of the rotor. So, like I said, I've tried numerous methods to get it off of there. It's not budging. Heat, you name it, I've tried it. So when all else fails, we cut it off, or at least cut it up so that we can get a better angle on it. So after we've cut it, I tried again to pull it and it wouldn't come off. So I've decided that I was going to soak just the pulley. So it's going to soak in simple green overnight, and then I soaked it in citric acid overnight. You can kind of see the crazy contraption I've got set up here where just the pulley and the shaft are being submerged. And once I got that done, I went to Harbor Freight and bought one of these pullers. Then I felt like, this will probably get it off of there. So using an impact wrench, yep, it started to move. And then I had to open it back up and put a socket in there because the opening is too small for the main screw. But once we got the socket in there, it came right off. There goes the socket. So next we're going to knock off the end bells or the end frames on the motor. So that's the other end, if you will. And then this would be the terminal end that still has the rotor inside it because the rotor doesn't want to come out. So we're going to drive that rotor out like so. And there's your rotor. So the data panel on the stator has these two drive panel screws, and all I'm doing is cutting a slot in them so that I can hopefully turn them out with a flat tip screwdriver, but they're made out of brass, so naturally they broke off like that. Got it turning, but then it broke off. So same thing happens here. So how do you fix this? Real simple. You just use a small chisel, knock off the rest of it. Try not to damage the data plate in the process. There's a little bit left there on that one that I got to get off. Now, granted, these are brass, so this is a lot easier with brass than it would be with steel, but same principle. And then once you've got that done, you should be able to just pry the panel up. Without bending it or damaging it. And then the drive screws or panel screws come out. So I've got this one stuck in here. So using a pair of dikes and a screwdriver for leverage, we can just pop it out of there. Easy peasy. And then we remove the base from the stator. And then we've got a cap on the wick for, it's a felt wick for the brass bearings that are in the motor. So get both of those out, and then we've got a brass GE logo that's on the other end of the motor. We're just going to pop it out of there. There we go. So we're missing one of the caps for the wicks, but we'll get to that later. And here we have the power panel. So we are just removing the screw. It normally has 2 screws in it. I've already got a replacement. We need to take this nut off of the switch, and then we can pry open. Now inside, everything is just screw wired together. So no soldering or anything like that. And then each one of the receptacles will come out. Really simple design. So here I've got the replacement receptacles that are 3-wire, grounded. And I'm measuring them, and then I'm measuring on the back side of the power panel where I'm going to cut. And then I mark it all off with a Sharpie. So it's really tight inside the power panel when you do this, so you can't go any wider than the than it already is because the two long screws would hit the receptacles. So you've got to cut towards the inside. But I'll go into more detail about that in the next video. So lastly, we're just going to put everything in a big bin, fill it with some simple green, and let it soak for 24 hours. And that'll wrap up this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please like and subscribe. Another video coming out soon. And as always, I appreciate it. And I will see you next time.